Greetings, fellow programmers. My name is Pavel, and I am here with another C# coding homework exercise in which we are going to work with arrays. We are to write a program that reads data into an array of type integer. Valid values are from 0 to 10. Our program should display how many valid values were inputted, as well as the number of invalid entries. Output a list of distinct valid entries and a count of how many times that entry occurred. And they gave us a test array to use, 1, 7, 2, and so forth. And you can see that some of the numbers are appearing several times, like number 4 is there 4 times. So this is an array exercise, so let's create a class that we will simply call a test array. So it's going to be test array. And in it we can initialize the array that they gave us with these numbers. I'm just going to copy paste them. I'm going to create a private integer array. I'll just call it numbers, and I'll initialize it with the values that they gave us. I just have to put some commas. So this is our test array that we will use in this exercise. Now we need to know few things. Like we know how many elements there are, we can just count them, but it's best to, not hard code it. Instead, use the Array.Length property to decide or to evaluate how many elements are in the array. So in our, I'm going to create a constructor and a property. So first let's do the property. It's gonna be public integer, and I'll call it number of elements, and that will hold the number of elements for the array. So we can keep changing it, and this will change with it. So in the constructor, we'll initialize the number of elements to the length of this array. Let me show you how. We'll just do the public constructor, test array, and in it we will do the number of elements property. We will set it to the numbers dot length. And if you look at it, it says get a 32-bit integer that represents the total number of elements in all the dimensions of the array. So that's how many elements there are in the array. So we have a constructor, and we have our property that we can access from our main class in the program. So there's two things we need to do. We need to evaluate or find valid entries. Valid numbers are from 0 to 10. So if the user tries to enter 11 or negative numbers, that's not a valid entry. So we have to find out how many valid entries were entered. Now in this case, in the test array, we can just look and see that basically all of them are, because all of them are between 0 and 10. But if I added 11, then that one would be an invalid entry. So we want to make it flexible enough to change this to anything we want, and it would still work. So we'll do a method called, I'll call it valid entries. And it will return an integer of how many valid entries there were, because that's what we want to find out. It says to output the number of valid or invalid entries. Well, if you know the valid, we will know also the invalid entries. So we will do a counter variable, and we will start a loop that will go through the array, and within it we will have an if statement that will determine whether the number is between 0 and 10. So we will do a for loop for integer equals I, integer I, sorry, equals 0. I is less. And how many times you loop? Well, it depends on how many elements there are in the array, which is the number of elements property. So we will loop number of elements times. That's the length of the array. And in the loop, we will do our if statement. So if the element in the array, or the current element that we are iterating through, if it is equal or greater than 0, and the element is also less or equal to 10, then we have a valid entry, so we can increase our counter, so counter plus plus. So at the end of the loop, we will have a counter that holds how many numbers are in the array are between 0 and 10, 0 and 10 included. So that's, after the loop concludes, we can just return the counter. So that's our valid entries. And now we have to actually count the entries. We need to know how many of the numbers are being used. Like, for example, number 4 is used 4 times. Number 7 is used 2 times. Number 1 is used 1 time, 2 times. So how many times each number occurs in the array. But you know what, before we do that, let's test this method. So let's go to our program, and in it we will instantiate the object. I'll just call it ARR for array, and it equals the new test array. And now we can actually just output how many valid and invalid entries there are, because we already calculated in our valid entries method. So our console.writeLine, writeLine, and in it we will do the number of elements, and this will basically say how many elements in total there are in the array. So we will do the number of elements, and it's an integer, so let's do it to string. I don't think it's necessary, but it's a good practice since you are outputting a string. So this will simply output the number of elements. Let's run that, and it says there are 12 elements in the array, and that's correct. We can say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So that is correct. Now let's output the how many valid and invalid entries there were. So console.writeLine and valid entries, and we will do that's gonna be the array object to the, we will simply call the valid entries method, and that one returns the counter with valid entries. If you remember, it's over here we check whether the entry is valid and add it to the counter, and at the end of the loop the counter is returned. So, and it says valid entries is 12. So let's change something here. Let's do an invalid entry. I'm gonna add somewhere in the middle. Invalid entry would be 11 because it's greater than 10. So if I run it now, it still says valid entries is 12, but number of elements now is 13. All right, so that seems to be working. But let's output the how many invalid entries there are, and it's a simple calculation. Invalid entries. And the calculation is very simple. We will simply, we have a number of elements, in this case 13, minus how many valid elements there are, which is 12. And that will give us the result of it will be the number of invalid elements. So array number of elements minus whatever is returned from the valid entries method, which is the counter with valid entries. And that should return, in this case, 1. And we have 1. We have 13 elements, 12 valid, 1 invalid. So this portion is working just fine. So next thing, like we said before, we need to do the we need to count the entries that are how many times each number occurs or repeats itself in the array. So I'm going to create a method. It's gonna be public method, and it will return an array of 10 or 11. Hold on a second. Count entries. Let me just type it and I'll explain. So it will return an array, and the array will be as long 0 to 10. So it will have 11 elements. So it will look something like this. It will have numbers 0 to 10 because those are the valid entries. No, anything negative or anything greater than 10 is not an invalid entry. We don't have to count that. We only count the valid entries. And if you look at the array over here, 1, 7, 2, and 4, what we're gonna do, we're gonna loop through the array and increase the index of the 0 to 10 array at the place of, or the index that corresponds with the value in this array. So, for example, we start with 1. We loop through the first element, which is 1. So we will simply add another 1. We will increase it by 1. So our index of 1 actually equals to 1 now. Now we go to the second one, which is 7. And you can see that there's 7 of the, 7 shows up twice. So our index of 7 will have the value of 2. So 1 and 1, and that equals 2. Now number 2 repeats twice. So again, that will be just like 7. It will have the value of 2. Number 4 is 1, 2, 3, 4 times. So it will be, as we loop through the array, the index of 4 will be increasing 4 times for the final of 4. And number 3 is there once, so we will only increase it to 1. 8 is there once, so that will have a value of 1. 11 we disregard because that's an invalid value. 6 again is just one times, and 7 we already did. And 0, 5, 9, and 10 would occur in this array 0 times. So at the end, our array, I'm just gonna call it numbers 2. So numbers 2 will have indexes 0 to 10 with values of 0, 1, 2, 1, 4, 0, 1, 2, 1, 0, 0. So when we come to count how many times number 4 occurred in our original numbers array, it occurred 4 times. The index of 4 will be increased 4 times. 3 will be only shows up once in the array, so it will have a value of 1. Index of 2 will have a value of 2. Index of 1, value of 1, and so forth. So, and this is how to code it. I'm gonna create the array. Like I said, I'm gonna just call it numbers 2, and I'll initialize the array with 11 elements, because again 0 through 10 is 11 elements. And we can do our loop. So for integer I equals 0 through I is again less than the number of elements, because we are looping through our numbers, our original and it can have many more or less elements. And I++, and in it we again have to make sure that the element is valid, that it is between 0 and 10. So if the numbers is the same thing like we did when we evaluated in our valid entries. So if numbers I'm just gonna actually even copy it, paste it, because it's the same logic. So if that is between 0 and 10, our numbers 2 array with the index, and this is the tricky part, of the numbers of I, we will increase it. So again, let me just, the first time the index is gonna be 1, numbers of index of 1. On the second iteration, the index increasing by 1 will be, the index is 7, because the number that we are checking is 7. The next one will be index of 2 increased by 1, and so forth. And we will return the array numbers 2, which will again hold all the elements 0 to 10, and how many times it showed in the original numbers array. So let's go to our program again, and we are going to create another array of integers. I'll call it entries count, and that one will simply call the method count entries and hold the array that is being returned from it. And we will just loop through it and output all the values. So for integer I, it's the same thing as always, equals 0. I is less than this time is the entries count dot, and the entries count is gonna be 10. I mean 11, because there's 11. We initialize it here as 11. So we could hard code it, but again, it's better not to hard code things like these in case the array changes later. So, but in this case, it would be 11, but we'll still do it as the length, and I++. And we don't have to, if we just output now, we could do that. We will do console.writeLine, and the number of occurrences, if I spelled it right, I don't know, for value of, and it's gonna be value of 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so forth, all the way to 10, is, and this is gonna be the number of occurrences. And we can do a space and simply output those two values. So the occurrence is going, I mean the value is the I index that we are looping through. That's gonna be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and all the way to 10. And how many occurrences? Well, that will correspond with the entries count of the same index. So if I run it now, I get the valid entries, invalid entries as before, and you can have the number of occurrences of 0 in our array, and here's the array, is 0. 0 is simply not there. 1 is there once. 2 is there twice, and you can validate it and check it that it actually matches. Again, 9 is 0 times, 10 is 0 times, 4 is 4 times, and so forth. But we only wanna, according to this exercise, we only wanna output how many occurrences of the numbers that actually are there. We don't care about 0 if it's not even there in the array. The same with 5. If 5 doesn't appear in the array, we don't need to output it. So we can simply come over here and do an if statement. If the entries count of the I, if the value is greater than 0, only then we will output it. So now it will only output the numbers that actually appear in the array. So 1 is there once, 2 is twice, 3 is once, 4 is 4 times, and so forth. And if you remember, in our array over here, we also added 11, and that didn't count because it's an invalid entry. But you know what, let me try I'm gonna add 10. I'm gonna add it twice, and I'm gonna add another 4. So let's see if it scales. And you can see that 10 is there now twice, and 4 is there now 5 times. So it did. And let's add a negative number just to make sure that is being skipped as well. So -5. And if I run it, now the number of elements is 17, valid entries is 15, invalid 2, and it counts the valid entries and how many times they appear in the array. All right, so this seems to be working fine. This is the exercise, and yeah, the biggest or most confusing thing is actually in our class when we are doing this, when we assigning the or increasing the index of that corresponds with the value of the numbers array. So that's, if you realize what we're doing there, then it's really fairly smooth way to deal with this kind of exercises. All right, so this is it. I hope it was helpful. If it was, please leave a like, leave a comment, share with your friends, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video. Take care.